Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. Check-ins. So I feel deeply calm. There's sort of like an existential anxiety associated with that. And there's just a desire to perform and act chill, like that doesn't exist. So welcome to the Stoa. I am Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa, and the Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And today we have my buddy, Daniel Thorson, fresh off of a 75-day silent retreat at the Monastic Academy. And so everyone was saying, yeah, Peter, you gotta get Daniel on the Stoa, talk about his experience. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So what we're gonna do is Dan and I are just gonna jam about his experience or whatever we want, or whatever emerges. And then you know the drill if you've been here before. Put your question in the chat box. I'll read on your behalf if you want me to read on your behalf, or I'll unmute you. And again, this we're probably going to YouTube, so just be cognizant of that. That being said, Daniel, I'll unmute you. How are you doing, my friend?
I accept your unmute. I'm doing great, Peter. I went to a hospital today to see if I have COVID antibodies, and they didn't have any tests, but it was great. Yeah. And so today is a day off here at the Monastic Academy. So I've spent most of my time just giving my attention to this community, which is a big part of what I felt coming out of retreat, was just how lucky I am to live in a beautiful place with beautiful people and who I get to like care for. So I'm feeling really nourished, I think, by just the beauty of this, of this community I live in.
And you came off retreat like a week ago? Is that like?
Yeah, like 9 days ago, I think.
9 days, yeah. And maybe, I imagine some people know what's up if they're attending a Daniel Thorson Welcome Back party, but for the odd person who might not know what's going on, so can you tell us a little bit of the backstory? Like, why did you go on this retreat? What you do on it? Like, just the whole context there.
Yeah, so as I said, I live at a place called the Monastic Academy, and I think you've had Yasna and Soryu on the show, so you know, we've got a number of folks representing Maple coming on the Stoa. And it's essentially a place, an educational institution where we use technologies, psychotechnologies like meditation and circling and the bioemotive framework to try to become people who are trustworthy in times of crisis. And it's a kind, and the idea of a long retreat is available for people who've trained in the system for a while and who are able to go it alone, essentially, because you know, usually you're in retreat with a group of people and you're kind of leaning on the group for support. And so the 75-day retreat, solo retreat, you know, every day is pretty much the same. You get up, I got up around 5:36, meditated for 2 hours, went for a walk, meditated for 2 hours, went for a walk, meditated for 2 hours, did some strength training, meditated for 2 hours, had lunch, went for a walk, meditated for 2 hours, had an interview with Soryu, meditated for 2 hours, go to sleep. So you're averaging, you know, 9 or 11 hours of formal practice a day. And I was mostly focused on a form of practice called the jhanas, which are states of like altered consciousness and absorption. I was also doing soul-making practice, which if you listen to my podcast, is a form of, a very kind of esoteric form of meditative practice taught by Rob Berbea. And then I was also just trying to get enlightened, which I did not achieve. I am not enlightened. Sorry to disappoint everybody who is maybe wanting me to be or something. I also wanted myself to be, but it didn't work out. Yeah, that's how I spent 75 days. It was the best experience of my life.
Wow. And so I remember we were emailing before you went, and you're like, I'm ready to die to the world. And you're like, you make it all sound sexy and dramatic and
Oh, did I
stuff.
say that?
um, so yeah, I'm curious going into it, like what was the strongest motivation or intention on your part? Did you actually think like, okay, there's a 50% chance I might become enlightened at the end of this?
No, I didn't have a very like particular desire. It on a I just knew I had to do a long retreat, or I wanted to do a long retreat, and I'd never done anything. I mean, I'd done a 45-day retreat, but that was a group retreat, and so this was a whole nother, just a whole other enchilada. I did really want to explore the jhanas. I thought that would be rad. And Rob Burbea had just released a 21-day jhana retreat series called Practicing the Jhanas. And so I used that to guide my practice, and it was amazing. It was completely life-changing.
So why did you say it was the best time of your life?
I think because for 75 days, I wasn't doing anything that I was ashamed of. Yeah. So it's partly that, and it's partly also just, it turns out if you like get rid of your phone and get rid of, everything that is distracting, you eventually settle in a place of extremely deep contentment and joy and appreciation of beauty and appreciation of nature and appreciation of the gift of life. And spending a lot of time in that space was just, I'm really grateful for it. It was wonderful.
And I think you were having sort of a Q&A on Twitter, people asking you questions. And one of them was sort of any kind of state changes or spiritual experiences that you had while on that retreat.
Well, there's two. So there's like experiences during the retreat, and then there's like shifts in my perception after retreat. And I had tons of very strange experiences because I was doing the soul making dharma, which is basically a way to find yourself in what many people would consider to be very strange experiences. Interacting with figures and divinities and things like that, daemons, angels, and then the jhanas themselves are what many people would consider as kind of prototypical spiritual experiences. Being completely absorbed in pleasure, such that your whole body becomes a field of pleasure, or being completely absorbed in happiness, such that your body becomes just a field of happiness and peace, and so on. So I just spent hundreds of hours absorbed in the experience of my body as a field of happiness, and it was, as you can imagine, pretty good. That's a pretty good way to spend time. And after retreat, definitely notice I'm happier. Things just kind of roll off my shoulder more easily. My heart is open more. And but it's hard to know what's going to go away in time and what's going to stick around. I don't know.
And so if you have any questions for Daniel, start popping them in the chat box. And so, yeah, I was invited by both Yasna and Soryu to come to your ceremony, your getting off, but the borders are closed. I think we couldn't make it. So how was that? Like, just sort of like, what was that like?
The ceremony?
Yeah, the ceremony, you coming out and like, you just run out to get like.
No, they the whole community, they had a drum, and they would play the drum and they would sing a song as they walked from the main center down to my cabin, which is maybe like a quarter mile away.
Oh, cool.
And then they would all come and kind of surround the cabin and sing to me. And I would come out and sort of be embraced by the community, both like physically and, metaphorically. And then I would we came back up to the meditation hall, and I shared a little bit about my experience to everybody who was present. And that was kind of like the reintegration.
Yeah. And so how are you responding now that, maybe like, how'd you get your download of what actually happened when you were gone with COVID and all that stuff?
Well, so when I went in, the WHO had just declared a pandemic. So I knew that
shit was going down.
Shit was going down.
Yeah.
But I had no idea what that would actually look like. And actually, COVID came to Maple. I don't know if you know this.
I heard that, yeah.
And I got COVID on my silent retreat.
Oh, shit, dude. Spiritual practice, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was fun. I had my phone, I had bricked my phone, but I recorded like voice notes where I was like, I think I have COVID. I was very sensitive to the symptoms because of course I was meditating. And so I kind of a little bit calibrated my expectation of what I would find based on my experience, I think, with the sickness, and it was fine for me. But coming out, it's been kind of like shocking. I think the degree to which it has completely occupied the world, it seems. I feel like I feel like I've missed some kind of collective trauma or collective, just very remarkable experience that I imagine I'll never be able to actually really be a part of.
Yeah. And what about most recently with all the riots that are happening?
How am I responding to it? Or?
Yeah.
I think I feel confused about it. I feel confused. Yeah.
Do you have a greater sensitivity of sort of like the collective, consciousness, emotionality that's happening right now?
No, I feel more disconnected because I think I didn't experience like all which was leading up to it. Although when I do go out, like I went to a grocery store. I've left Maple a couple of times. I went to a grocery store and very soon after the retreat, and my heart was very open. And I was very sensitive to the people I was encountering, and I could tell that there was just a lot more anxiety. People were holding a lot more anxiety in their bodies. I was kind of shocked, actually. Yeah.
So let's pivot to some of the questions. I do want to talk to you about like ecology of practices and stuff like that, because there's something that's emerging, wisdom gym that's emerging out of the Stoa, but that probably could be bookmarked for another conversation. So Benita Roy, you said you had a question, but you said it in private chat. I don't know what that means. You want me to read it on your behalf, or you want to read it? So I'm just going to call you out and see.
No, go ahead. You can read it. Hi, Daniel.
Oh, hi, Bonita. It's lovely to see you. Hi.
Okay.
I guess I could read it.
Yeah, I think you can read it.
Okay. Let's see. Let me get my screen up here. Yeah, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, before you went into retreat, you were grieving about existential risk. We had a couple of conversations about that. So looking back now, do you have a view on that perspective that you didn't have before?
Well, I thought a lot about death on the retreat. Started when I started thinking about my parents, in particular my mother, possibly my mother dying. And that opened me up to about maybe like 15 days where I was going to bed without really knowing that I would wake up the next day, like not knowing that that's something I just can't take for granted. And something about that process during the retreat has shifted the way I'm relating to existential risk, or even like the kind of like global or national situation. Like, to be honest, I feel pretty ambivalent about like continuing my podcast or having like abstract conversations, and a lot more of my energy seems naturally disposed towards cultivating the community that I'm already embedded in, and really just appreciating the people that I'm around. And there seems to be some kind of way that is how I'm responding to that anxiety that I think I was expressing to you. Yeah. What do you think of that, Benita? Am I allowed to ask questions back to people that are?
Yes, only to Benita though.
We
Seems reasonable.
We made rules. as a species when you were gone.
I feel that there are like norms that I do not know. Like I was at a grocery store and I went around a corner and somebody like fucking like jumped.
No joke. We made rules as a species when you were gone.
It's true. It's true.
No, I greatly appreciate your answer, because I know that yeah, it was tricky when you and I were talking about it, about how to bear the witness of that. And okay, I'm gonna say something. And how unbelievably weightless lights out for everyone could be.
Yeah.
Is I think what you're saying.
Yeah. There's something about the connection between love and death that became entered into me, that feels really helpful in relating to these sorts of topics. Yeah. That I get to love because I get to die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's those paradoxes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. Nice to see you.
Travis, you had a question.
Yeah, Daniel, I don't know you, so it feels kind of weird coming to a welcome back party, but I'm supposed to be on a 60-day retreat that started in February. It got canceled 45 days in because of the COVID thing. So I kind of resonate very much with your experience of kind of coming out into a world that has changed very significantly. Wow. I'm interested in your practice of the jhanas. I haven't done much jhana practice. I've had brushes with it early on in my practice that were unintentional, but how did you practice the jhanas? And can you walk us through like the process of absorption, like becoming or reaching the jhanas? And how would you characterize each of the levels?
Sure, I can give a brief description according to my understanding, but if you're interested in this topic, you, Travis, or anybody who's listening, I highly recommend Rob Babea's retreat talk series, Practicing the Jhanas. So what I'm about to say is mostly based on that. So the way that in my experience that absorption works is I'll sit down to meditate, and I will, follow my breath or whatever, and eventually I'll notice that there's some well-being in my experience. And the skill of cultivating absorption is basically like, how do you amplify that? And the way you amplify anything in consciousness is by attuning to it. So you just sort of like start to tune in to the pleasure in your experience. And by tuning into it, it starts to grow. It starts to become more salient. It starts to become more available. It starts to saturate the body. And then if you do that well, you eventually reach a kind of like what feels like an autocatalytic feedback loop, where your attention wants to pay attention to pleasure because pleasure feels good, and because that causes more attunement, it amplifies it more. So that's when the first jhana starts to actually like flourish. And then you're like in this obviously altered state of consciousness, which in the case of the first jhana can be actually like so pleasurable so as to be uncomfortable. Like it's so much pleasure in the body that it actually like isn't pleasurable. But you kind of just let it work your energy system until it then begins to settle. As it settles, you naturally move into the second jhana, where instead of just pleasure, happiness comes to the forefront. And then you kind of absorb yourself in the feeling of happiness, which is weird because actually it's very uncommon, I think, in the human experience to experience happiness without much pleasure. Usually happiness comes with pleasure. So if you think of like laughter, there's both the physical pleasure and then there is some happiness. But in the case of the second jhana, it's more or less just, or increasingly just happiness. And then in the third jhana, which is as far as I've got, I only made it to the third jhana, the pleasure completely fades, and it's this like exquisite, unbelievably lovely contentment. Like my experience of it was the most lovely phenomenological experience I have ever had in my life. Like I did not know that perception could feel that good, kind of thing. And yeah, you just, at least according to Rob's model, you just spend hundreds and hundreds of hours marinating in each of those stages in order to sort of like slowly rework the conditioning of the mind, and also to learn about how it is that you can kind of sculpt perception through different ways of participating with it. And it's amazing. It's just like a really beautiful journey. And, you know, obviously it's somewhat dependent on the conditions of a retreat, but even now, like 10 days after retreat, like there's some kind of skill of just like learning how to sculpt or participate such that well-being becomes just amplified, that you can learn, and then just that is the best skill. It's a really good skill to learn. It's a really amazing skill to learn. I would highly recommend learning that skill. Yeah, because I mean, it emancipates you from sensory pleasure, you know, like, and all kinds of other benefits. Yeah, is that helpful?
It's badass. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Yeah.
I want to get my Jana game on now.
Yeah.
So Jacob had a question, wants me to read it. You said figures, angels, daemons. Is it your intuition that these spirits are benevolent?
Oh, great question. So like all things, figures, angels, demons, the way that they are depends on how we participate with them. So if you extend trust to them, if you view them as if they are benevolent, then they will be benevolent, actually. And so if you look at like people who experience like angels who are malevolent, it's often because they're not extending that trust. They're actually participating with them in a way that constructs them as malevolent. And so it's not that they are or are not benevolent, but that they become benevolent based on or dependent on your participation, your perception of them, the way that you look at them, the way that you relate to them. And so all of the beings that I encountered were definitely benevolent, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Drew, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so like the question that you're answering about the orientation towards well-being, did any of this feel like remembering, or did these feel like new states that you hadn't experienced before?
Definitely like the first jhana felt a little bit like, I think I spent time in that state as a child, like in the woods. I had that feeling when I was kind of getting into it. And it should be said that these states are actually not like constructions. They're actually what arises as you let go, right? So they're states of relatively less fabrication or whatever. And in a sense, once you actually get into them, my experience was that they felt more natural than waking consciousness. That was the feeling kind of being in them. So yeah, the first jhana felt a little bit like something I was remembering, and the subsequent ones just felt like more and more like home or something. Yeah, it's an interesting question though. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, thank you for answering that. I wasn't sure what I was thinking, but I thank you. That it's kind of catalyzing something here. Not sure what yet.
Okay, cool.
Cool. This is a question. Yeah, so it seems like there's people who are question shy in the chat box. Usually we have a lot of questions going. And maybe they thought there was going to be an actual party, not this
That's reasonable.
a Q&A. But I'll have some, I know Travis has his brain to ask you more questions, but I'll have a few questions for you. It's like, what's, yeah, like you and I were talking before about like how kind of we're in and out with the podcasting and we don't really want to talk about this abstract stuff, but
yeah.
What is alive for you right now besides building the community? Or like maybe we can talk a little bit more about the aliveness about building that communitas and community there.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's alive for me is, so the person in whose framework that I was mostly practicing, Rob Berbea, he passed away while I was on retreat. Folks who listen to my podcast know I've interviewed him, 4 or 5 times. And in my estimation, he was he was a genius of like unbelievable quality. And so I feel a lot of inspiration to make sure that his work keeps getting amplified, even with his passing. I think that he actually created and discovered a praxis of resolving the meaning crisis like thoroughly with his soul-making dharma. And I think that he, more than anybody else, rendered the teachings of emptiness, which are the core of the Buddhist system, into a kind of philosophical framework that is accessible to the Western mind. And I just think that what he did is unbelievable, and I will probably spend the rest of my life kind of learning, going deeper into it and sharing it in various ways. Mm-hmm. That's a big part. And I think, part of it for the conversations for me, it's like, I don't know. I sometimes lose the point.
Yeah, same.
I lose the point. Like, it's like, I've had a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of epiphanies. And at the end of the day, it's like, how is this helping me love the people around me more? How is this helping me get up the gumption to plant a seed in my garden? Mm-hmm. Is it or not? Or what is it really doing? And so I'm kind of feeling a little bit more like, it's like put up or shut up. Like, what is this actually offering to me? Other than a fantasy, which is beautiful. I love fantasy. We need fantasy. But like, is it a fantasy that I want to participate in, that's actually doing good in the world? I don't know.
Mm. I don't know. So now we get a bunch of questions. Okay. Let's just see. Jay, you had a question.
Oh, Jay is here. Hey, Jay. Where's Jay?
Hello.
Oh, Jay.
Yeah. So my question is, I understand that you're the director of programs at Maple.
Yeah.
Are you planning on making any changes to the programming of either awakening or responsibility practices at Maple based on any experiences you had on the retreat?
It's a good question. We haven't really figured that out yet here, honestly. Okay. I think, so one thing, Jay, that but probably other folks listening don't know, is that here at Maple, we divide the program up into 2 programs. One is Dragon and the other is Phoenix. Dragon is really just hell-bent on awakening. Like, that's the only thing that is relevant or salient to that program. Whereas Phoenix is much more involved with personal growth and psychological healing and things like that. And I can imagine a lot of these frameworks embedding themselves into the Phoenix curriculum. It also is the case that the soul-making Dharma in particular is very useful at helping people discover what you might call their like soul duty, right? That there's some kind of teleological pull into the future that your soul is asking you to abide by. And this is kind of a psychotechnology of allowing yourself to be pulled in that direction with all the attendant meaningfulness, sacredness, divinity that comes with honoring that duty. And I think that to the degree that Maple is about awakening and responsibility, like that really kind of seals the relationship between responsibility and awakening for me. Because only when you can really, well, I'll just say it seals the deal between those 2. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so there's a question that was someone wanted to read on their behalf. Okay, this is juicy. Were there points during the retreat where you felt like giving up?
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, that was absolutely. There was one day in particular that I can share about on day 25 or so, which as you might imagine, is a horrible period of time, like day 20 to 30, because you've already been on retreat for what feels like an absurd amount of time, and you're not even like a third done. So if you do begin suffering or like constructing suffering, it quickly gets out of hand. And I like woke up having a bad dream about my inadequacy or whatever, and laid down to do some relaxation practice. And you know, I don't think it's a good idea to anthropomorphize your neuroses too much, but it felt like there was like a demon in me that was just knew that I was in a moment of vulnerability and just started like stabbing me in the stomach over and over and over again, whereby all of my insecurities basically became just like in the jhana, like an autocatalytic self-reinforcing feedback loop, to the point where I was just more tormented than I can remember being in years. It was truly horrible. And though much of the retreat was spent exploring pleasure, this was like, it's really important to experience this kind of pain. And I hated it, and it was horrible. And I thought about leaving. I thought about leaving Maple. I thought about, I had like, there was suicidal ideation. At that point, I wasn't even identified with that ideation, but I could see my mind constructing it. It actually became fascinating at that moment. And whew, eventually I went for a walk, and that created enough space for some kindness to come in. And eventually that became one of the most valuable experiences of the retreat, but it was really touch and go for 3 hours or so. What it did give me though was that because I had so much mindfulness at the time, I saw the building of that experience was slowed down enough that I saw exactly how I was participating in it to create it, how it is that I constructed it. And what happened subsequently is that that amplitude of that experience could never be achieved again, because I would withdraw my participation, almost like when you touch a fire, you pull your hand back. I would withdraw my participation before it would get to that point. That I think depends a little bit on the amount of mindfulness I had. I suspect I could find myself back in that state now that I'm off retreat. But, yeah.
And you said you were talking to Soru. Was it every day that you had a session with him?
Like 4 days a week, 4 or 5 days a week. Yeah.
And what did he have to say about that thing that you went through?
He actually said to treat those kinds of experiences as demons who are demanding your compassion.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you say like, oh,
like
there's a demon here. How can I relate? How can I love it? Essentially.
Yeah. Give it love, because it's like a cry out for help type thing.
Yeah. Not easy to do.
Okay. Matt, you had a question.
Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
So my question, as you were talking about some of your experiences, I was noticing that there were certain things, certainly not to the same intensity level, I guess, but things that reminded me of experiences that I personally had while doing kind of like path working things during the tarot.
Yeah.
And then, so I've had personal experience with that, and then I've heard similar kinds of like directed imaginal technologies being used in different cultural and traditional contexts. And I wondered, from having both the intense experience that you had on this retreat and also just, you know, you've had so many conversations with so many people and from so many different backgrounds, do you think that these types of experiences, whether they are dressed up in certain cultural, traditional contexts, have, what am I trying to say, like a certain kind of commonality or ubiquity that we may not really credit, or like, is it something of just about the way the human psyche and mind works that people have sort of accidentally discovered in a lot of ways, and then worked into different more elaborations and techniques to do it? I was just wondering if you had any insight on what you think about that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful question. My model is something like how do I say this? That the human mind, absent of like the weird ideological superstructures that we've created in the modern world, is prone to imaginal experiences of the sort that I was describing. And that if in effect, it seems like, after my experience on retreat, it seemed like at the end that I could see that it is almost as if we have constructed the entire experience, ideology, ontology, epistemology of the West, so to speak, in order to prevent the emergence of the imaginal. But that is, like, weirdly, it seems like that. And so the experience of, for me, having been born into an academic family and being an atheist for most of my life and a materialist and all that, is that I have to very systematically deconstruct these philosophical and embodied ways of viewing the world in order so that the imaginal can flood back in. And once you start to deconstruct those, like, you actually have to, like, fight to keep it away. And then you can use you can use whatever psychotechnology you want. There's, like you say, there's tarot. Actually, the world becomes a psychotechnology of imaginal practice. Like, the trees become imaginal, the sky becomes imaginal, your psyche becomes imaginal, your body becomes imaginal, others become imaginal. It's unstoppable, essentially, unless you stop it through, reified ontologies and all the stuff that we like to do in our culture. Yeah.
Cool. Danny, do you have a question?
Hi, Danny.
Hello.
I'm going to go back to your not feeling so good about conversations, and to the jhanas, the experiences. And so what I'm playing with is, does the well-being and the happy and the contentment, do they leave this experience when you're in conversation?
No. Yeah.
But there was something about there was something about the conversations. What is it about conversations that are
sure,
that are feeling less than?
Well, I wouldn't say it's conversations. It's a particular type of conversations where I'm exploring, like, abstract ideas. Like, even right now, I feel very connected with you as I look at you on my computer, and I feel the happiness in me, and it feels satisfying. It's more about, like, how am I wanting to spend my time? What is the most meaningful and useful and important and way to spend my time? And it's an open question whether it is to have, like, intellectual, kind of cutting edge, interesting conversations with people that aren't actually in my life, that are halfway across the planet or something. It's just, I'm not saying it's not. That might be exactly the best way that I can spend my time. But I don't want to, I think it's only through interrogating it and being sure of that I can actually throw myself in with abandon to that process. Yeah, but no, totally. I mean, conversations for me are only good if you are embodied and, like, speaking in ways that give rise to mutual states of well-being, I think, actually. Yeah. So for me, like, in a lot of ways, the concentration practice and meditation is kind of just like, it's almost like cuddling with your energy body, right? You're like, oh, what does my body, what does my soma, like, need right now to feel really good, to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to feel warm, to feel this state of well-being? And just so, like in conversation, if you tune into people really well, you can actually start to do that dance with others. And that is super rad. It's a little bit hard to do on the internet. And that's why I'm kind of feeling drawn to more in-person conversations here in my community, but it can be done. I know it can be done because some people do it to me and it's really lovely. And yeah, so yeah, that well-being is definitely available in conversation. Yeah.
And Jen, do you have a follow-up question, Danny?
No, I just said lovely.
Mm-hmm. And Jen, you had a question?
Yeah. Hey, Daniel.
Hi.
I'm just wondering how your relationship with information and technology has changed since coming back. I remember when I come back from like a week of camping and I turn my phone on, it's like,
oh my God, yeah.
Notifications and red things. So I'm just curious, immediately and over time, what that's been like.
Oof. Well, so I completely I actually used my phone during the retreat to listen to Dharma talks, but I completely bricked it. Like I figured out how to even remove the time from the menu bar. I uninstalled every app on the phone except for like the voice recorder and the app to listen to Dharma talks. It was completely like useless except for those things. And since I've gotten back, I've been titrating very carefully my exposure to the internet. And what I've been doing is I've been trying to use it only as much as it feels good to my nervous system. And then I just drop it. And that so far has turned out to be a lot less than before retreat. So I use the internet a lot less than I was. And for my phone, I haven't unbricked it. I've been like dragging my feet and sort of like only unbricking the aspects of it that seem like I'm going to get in trouble with like my friends or my work if I don't unbrick that aspect. And so it's still very like useless, which is great. But oof, this whole thing is a hell of a drug. It's really, really, really has a huge impact on my nervous system. And I don't think that I really understood that before I kind of downregulated so much in the retreat I was in. Yeah. I'm actually, I have fear about how powerful it is in terms of how it can affect my cognition, my physiology, my nervous system, and how addictive it is too. Because I could see myself just completely losing myself into it again very easily.
Can you say more about why the word fear? You use that word. That's kind of interesting.
Because I like to feel this quality of like aliveness and vibrancy, and I'm afraid that I will sacrifice that on the altar of technology and information. Yeah, I'm afraid that I'm weak, basically.
Malcolm Ocean, you had a question?
Oh, Malcolm's here. Hey, Malcolm.
Yeah, I got the whole gang here.
Oh, let's see.
And
Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
There's actually a couple of people off camera too.
Oh, wow.
We don't have our wide angle lens.
Oh, wow. Hi.
So yeah, the question I had put in the chat was something about just your experience involving bioemotive at the retreat.
Oh, yeah.
You and I met at the bioemotive retreat at Maple last year, and
totally.
Yeah, just kind of curious about that. There are some things that are like also feel like I could say, but that are more like subtle and felt harder to type into a chat box. But you seem like you got stuff you're excited to say about the bioemotive thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, it was invaluable. I don't know that I would have survived this retreat without bioemotive, frankly. So the first like 15 to 20 days, I probably spent an hour to 2 hours a day just processing and crying. I went through two full boxes of tissues in the first 2 weeks. I once tapped into a well of sadness that I thought I like broke myself. Like I just kept crying, you know, like I was like, oh no, I did something wrong. I just kept crying. I think I cried for like 40 minutes or 45 minutes straight, which is much, much longer than I've ever cried before. I mean, maybe when I was like a baby or something. I don't know. I don't remember.
Well,
yeah. So it was totally integral to the whole experience.
One thing I'm also curious about in relation to that is like, I've sometimes found myself feeling like I've come up against a limit in doing bioemotive on my own, where it's like, I feel like I need somebody to hold me in order to feel safe doing the practice. And I'm like, how did you spend hours crying alone in the cabin and feel held? And I don't know what kind of answer there could even be to that question.
Oh no, I have a very
great
answer. Yeah.
You're muted.
I was held by the imaginal figures that I discovered. So I would see them with me, loving me as I kind of experienced and related to the pain that was alive in me. And that seemed to be enough to allow myself to feel held and supported in the way that I think you're looking for. Yeah. And then different figures would support me in exploring different pain.
Wow, that's so cool. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, me too. Nice to see you, Malcolm.
And so Doug, the guy who created the biomotive framework, he's coming into STOA this Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern time for an introduction session. So if you want to know more about that, you can RSVP on the website. Stephen, you had a question about the relationship with death.
Yeah, Daniel, you had mentioned something about love and death earlier. I was interested to hear a little more about that. I had asked how your relationship with death has changed, and maybe related or maybe a different question, but how your relationship with Eros has changed.
Yeah, well, so the death thing, I seem to have finally tipped over to the point where I know I'm going to die. Like, I think, I know, you can, well, you know you're going to die. Certainly, probably, you know that all biological things die. But for me, I could pretend that I was not going to die. I spent my whole life pretending I was not going to die. And I think on this retreat, I finally turned a corner where I acknowledge that I am going to die. And that did open up a lot more love. It opened up a lot more gratitude. It opened up a lot more feeling of the inexplicable gift of life. Just that I get to experience anything at all ever is unbelievable. And I don't know how that related to Eros. Only in that I could use that kind of vibrancy to sort of tune in to the erotic relationship with life and with my experience. But yeah, this is something I haven't really fully explored. I don't think, at least articulated. So I appreciate the question. Don't know. Really.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
So let's see, we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Travis, you had a question, you had a few other ones that you popped up there in the chat box. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask them?
Yeah, I think that this is maybe a relevant one. You mentioned that the solo retreat was very different from a group long retreat. Can you highlight some of the differences, and also any tips for practice for somebody who might do this that wouldn't be generally included in the tips that people get for retreats?
Well, the first one, I think that the differences are, one, that there's not other people to project on, right? So if you sit a group retreat, you will inevitably fall in love with somebody and hate somebody else and think the teacher is a total idiot, or think that they're a god. And in whatever case, they color your experience pretty mightily. But you just don't have that luxury on a solo retreat, which is amazing, because then it's just so clear that it's all you. It was just so great. It's such a load off. And so there's a kind of like inescapability with regards to your own experience, which is just really horrible and relentless and delightful. So that was, and especially with, I think, long solo retreats, it's like, you can kind of fake it for a week or 10 days. You can kind of like pretend to be a really good meditator for 10 days and make it through, and then like go back to your normal habits and patterns. But 75 days, like, you're going to see all of your things, you know, and you're not going to be able to really fool yourself in the same way that you can on a shorter retreat. And so, you know, I just saw parts of myself that I would have rather not seen, but that I did see and I couldn't escape. And that was a great gift that I would have avoided receiving for the rest of my life, without a doubt, if I weren't forced into a situation like that solo retreat. As far as tips, I don't know. It really depends on what you're going for, what your practice is. I think one thing is that for me, I get a lot of nourishment just from kind of like connecting with others on a group retreat, like just, you know, even silently, just being in their presence and seeing them and seeing their energy, being with them. And so you don't have that also on a solo retreat, obviously. And so learning instead how to connect with nature really profoundly, like how to connect with a squirrel in the way that a squirrel demands to be connected with, or a bird or a tree. That, I think if I didn't know how to do that, I would have had a lot more experiences of like depression and insecurity than I did. So like, you know, yeah, just really, really connecting with the birds. I spent a lot of time connecting with the birds. It was great. Yeah, so that's what comes to mind. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So this might be the last question. Bonita, do you want to potentially bring us home? You had another question.
Yeah, hi. I'm remembering that you said on Twitter that your relationship to your body changed, or your I don't know what the word is, like your aspect toward your body was changed, and I was curious about that.
Oh yeah. Well, so there are two pieces to that, I think. One is the jhanas, just experiencing my body over and over again as a field of profound happiness, like not as bones or cells or sensations, like, but as just happiness, subtle happiness, like uproarious, bubbly happiness. That was all that was here, like inside, outside, all around. Just like slowly started to change my understanding of what a body is and what a human is. I'm still not really sure how, but it started to kind of just disrupt my naive assumptions, I think. And then the other piece is that I more profoundly than ever realized that nothing in my experience can actually harm me. Nothing that my body is sharing with me is going to hurt me. And
like, yeah, because there's so many teachings and so much psychology. It's the opposite. The body holds the scars. The body knows the score. The body is the suffering, and the mind is going to liberate. Like,
totally.
It's a great fucking reversal.
Yeah, like, totally.
Big deal.
Totally. Well, and I heard a teacher say that jhanas are the opposite of trauma, right? Trauma is this like kind of contracted, fearful state of the body where the body becomes a field of pain, essentially. And part of the reason why you spend so much time in jhanas is you're basically training the nervous system in the opposite movement. And so, yeah, I mean, my body feels much more mysterious than it did before, like that it could be happiness or peace. I don't actually know what this is.
Yeah, no.
Which is great. Yeah, it's really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bonita.
All right, so maybe we'll sneak in one more question because it's kind of a good one. So Jacob, the guy who asked about the figures, demons, angels thing, he says, so if so, how do you know they aren't deceiving you? These beings.
What? Like, how would they? What is that? How would they be deceiving me? I don't know.
Jacob, can you unmute yourself and ask your question if you don't mind?
Sure. So I guess, yeah, it's first just to really establish the first question, like, are they more powerful? Would you say
More
yes or
powerful
no?
than what?
Well, at any level of analysis, more powerful maybe than you.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah, it's worth thinking about, because if they are, they might be deceiving you, and then you're just screwed no matter what.
Huh. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I kind of have the trump card because I can just ignore them or deconstruct them into emptiness.
So you're assuming you're more powerful than they are.
None of what you're asking has ever entered into my consciousness.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a little I'm intense right now, a little antagonistic like usual, and I apologize for that. I'm gonna try to tone it down a bit.
No, it's okay. I'm struck by how this has never been relevant to my practice. But I think that's because of the precision with which the conceptual framework of soul-making Dharma is constructed. And so I don't think I can really do justice to where you're coming from. I know that in a lot of like occult traditions, this is a big piece, is how to move into these kinds of spaces without incurring harm or being possessed or whatever. But because of the conceptual framework of the soul-making Dharma, it becomes a non-issue, essentially.
Well, can I say one more follow-up question to that?
Please.
It's like we're just coming off the heels of getting screwed by power for a long time. So I feel like the one place we need to be sensitive is getting screwed by power. So I think this is a question that like should be probably like somewhere near the top. Like, is the power deceptive? You know?
Is the power deceptive?
Yeah.
Yeah, my sense, my intuition is telling me that you and I are coming from very, very different like ontologies.
Totally.
And so we'd have to have a much longer conversation to kind of work out how to line up with it.
Yeah, we should do it sometime. Nice to meet you, Daniel.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you, Jacob. So yeah, Daniel, so your first visit at the Stoa, any kind of final words for us here?
Oh, thank you all for such lovely questions. And it was really fun to see your faces and to say hello. Yeah, a lot of folks here that I know. It feels like this is, I integrated with this physical community. This feels a bit like an integration with the online part of my psyche. So I appreciate this very much.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend, for coming on the Stoa. Greatly appreciated. It was good seeing you again for after so long. Yeah, what do I want to say? I don't know if I want to say anything. I kind of like was hesitant of making this a Q&A format because I wanted to maybe more informal, invite you back in a different way. But I think this went pretty well because there's some good questions in the chat box. So if you want to check out future events, we've got a lot coming this week at the Stoa. Just go to thestoa.ca, sign up for the mailing list. And the Stoa is based off a gift economy, reviewing it as a place for us to freely use in this time of need. If you're inspired to give a gift to the Stoa, just go to the website, go to the gift economy at the bottom of the page. All right, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Daniel.